Doctors of Reddit, what made you say how the duck is this person still alive? Witnessed a sit-in with a trailer, flip 4 times at 75 miles per hour on a highway into a ditch right in front of me. A 12-year-old wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was thrown from the vehicle through an open window. He had a superficial laceration of his leg and was in shock, but otherwise apparently unharmed. We did a quick trauma evaluation of the family. Everyone seemed okay and applied pressure to the kid's bleeding leg until EMS got there. When we were running to the wrecked car as the dust was settling, I was sure we were just going to see disembodied pieces of that kid everywhere, but he was really lucky. Wear seatbelts, folks. Everyone who remained buckled in the car didn't even have a scratch. Both of the stories I'm sharing occurred during the Nepal earthquake of 2015. First was an infant who had a roof fall on his head. He was trapped for 10 minutes before being rescued and took another 3 hours to drive him to the nearest functioning hospital. This happened in a remote area and he was brought in a taxi. His face was so swollen that it was probably more than double its original size. The top of his head was completely flat, like a dinner plate, and he had raccoon eyes Wikipedia, or Wiki Raccoonus. But somehow he was showing no danger signs and his vitals were normal. A CT scan miraculously showed that there was no brain damage or even an actual fracture. He had something called a ping pong fracture idiopedia, or Garticles ping pong skull fracture. The child recovered pretty well and was discharged in a couple of days. Second was a lady who was roughly 8 months pregnant. Again, the roof of her house fell on her, sadly on her belly. From what she said, she was stuck under the rubble for about 4 hours, and it took a further 2 to 3 days to airlift her to the hospital. An X-ray of the pelvis was done which showed that it was broken badly in at least 4 places. But miraculously enough, there was very minimal bleeding. Someone with pelvis fracture can bleed to death easily, and she had multiple fractures in her pelvis. Nobody can say what happened for sure, but it was thought that probably the weight of the rubble was so strong that it actually helped stop the bleeding due to the applied pressure. More miraculously enough, the baby showed no signs of injury or even stress, even though the roof fell straight on her belly and was delivered healthily via C-section. I'm not a doctor, but the story of Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead always makes me go, how did he live that long? Basically he smoked every day since he was about 11, drank an entire bottle of Jack mixed with Coke every day, and when he was diagnosed with diabetes in 2015 he switched to a bottle of vodka every day. He never ate healthy, only exercise he got was performing, and refused to drink water. When his doctor said he was dehydrated he just added more ice to his Jack and Coke. But astonishingly, even in his 60s, in an interview he said he just went down to the doctor and he said his lungs were fine, liver was fine, essentially in pretty much perfect health, not even tinnitus or hearing difficulties, despite Motorhead concerts being said to be some of the loudest. Almost all his health problems came during the last 2 to 3 years of his life, and they can mostly be attributed to old age, not lifestyle. He died in 2015 just after his 70th birthday, to the shock of everyone, because he was drinking and partying just a couple days beforehand. This guy was seriously indestructible, and it's a miracle he lived to his age. Edit, it's Jack and Coke not rum and Coke /view 200B. Not a doctor, but a student nurse. I had a patient come into the psych ward from the emergency department after he had cut off his own right arm from the elbow down with a ducking chainsaw. He only survived because he apparently had some kind of rare clotting disorder that prevented him from bleeding to death. He was severely schizophrenic and believed that his arm was going to grow back. Edit, I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did. I love this story because my dad was a psychiatrist, and I finally have something way weirder than any of the tales of his profession he ever told. Happy you all found it as interesting as I did. Not a doctor, but firefighter. We had a 30-year-old male put a shotgun in his mouth pointing up to his nose, pull the trigger and survive. We show up, work him, he's breathing, but missing most of his face, and we transport him. He survives and we are all amazed. 3 months later he does it again, but 22 to the temple, it bounced around and exited through his eye. He survives again, with some mental deficits and a glass eye, but still one of the craziest I've ever seen. Not a doctor, but I do have a story. Friend of a friend. She was hiking and got a scratch on her leg. Later that night she wasn't feeling well, so she went to the hospital. They said it was flu and sent her home. She went back the next day and was diagnosed with sepsis. She wound up in a medically induced coma and had to lose all 4 of her limbs and had a lot of internal issues as well. She's doing great now with prosthetics and an amazing attitude. I helped take care of an old dude who had one leg amputated and had broken his other leg, so he was seeing us because of that. He was on oxygen and not being very compliant with using his wheelchair. We were talking with him and he was getting really argumentative. How am I supposed to chop wood in a wheelchair? Was what he kept demanding. When asked how he was chopping wood with one leg in the first place, he responded that he'd crawl into the woods and hop up to chop the wood. This was even more concerning. When the doctor asked how he was carrying his axe, oxygen, and the wood he chopped, he looked him straight in the eye and said, "I carry M on my back." Not sure if he was serious, but he was pretty dang grizzled and looked like he may have been crawling through the woods. Older woman called 911 for chest pain. Her vital signs were sheet, and she had the look that anyone who's ever seen a patient about to die will recognize instantly. Her EKG suggested multiple blockages in her coronary arteries, and we had to put her on a ventilator shortly after she got to the ER because she deteriorated so quickly. Cath lab confirmed the EKG findings: complete blockage of one artery and 99% blockage of 2 other major arteries. Unfortunately, it was too extensive to resolve with PCI, so the only option was to fly her to the university hospital in the city for an emergent triple bypass. It turned out that she'd had multiple episodes like this, but not quite as severe, over the last 6 months, and had refused bypass surgery not once, not twice, but 3 times in favor of a Mediterranean diet. Well, at this point she didn't have much say anymore and family agreed, so off to the OR she went. I took care of her again about 4 months later, and she actually seemed to have made a remarkable recovery. As a student, had a young guy come in who self-inflicted a 22 to the inside of his mouth and passed out. Awoke the next morning, didn't recall the night prior, went to work. 2 hours into work he says he's not feeling right and starts acting odd. Co-workers call EMS. They take him in, and the ED is working him up, and in the process notices a mix of clear fluid and blood in the back of his mouth. They call ENT, and get a caught head. Shows 11 or so bullet fragments throughout his noggin. The guy was acting by that time completely unfazed. I was very fazed. Kind of a retelling, but one time a cadaver on which I was performing an autopsy had a lung which was flipped upside down. When I tried to flip it to the proper position, bloop, it flipped right back to upside down. After some due diligence we realized the lung was a transplant, and the surgeons who performed the transplant had attached the organ incorrectly. The lung had been fighting to be upside down its whole life, and this other man, after 15 or so years, the man eventually moved in a way that allowed it to flip over, resulting in his death. Not really a how the duck is this person still alive, but more of a how the duck did this person live this long with this condition. Apostrophe. Best one I saw was a guy shot in the back, half an inch from his spine. He was totally stable sitting and talking to us. We saw the bullet sitting in between his SVC, aorta and esophagus with injuries to no vital structure. Walked out a day or two later with just a band-aid. Literal millimeter either way and he would have been a corpse, paralyzed or needed major reconstructive surgery. Edit. To be clear, we saw the bullet on CORD scan. Med student here. My most memorable patient was a particularly pleasant middle-aged man who was flown back to my hospital in the Midwest after suffering a 6-story fall from a hotel balcony in the Caribbean. The story goes this poor fella just arrived at his hotel planning to spend a week in paradise. Immediately upon arriving to his hotel, he stepped out on his balcony to watch the sunset and leaned on the railing, only to have it collapse underneath him. He fell 6 stories straight down and suffered bilateral open tibial pilion fractures, which are particularly high energy and difficult to heal. Orthoinfo. ARDS. Or globulus sets figures R00527F03. JPG. The poor guy apparently fell into a locked backyard and his wife and kids had to listen to him screaming in pain and bleeding for over 2 hours before they could get the fire department to break down the gate. He was taken to the hospital on the island he was staying where he was stabilized, and they recommended he have both legs amputated. He begged to be shipped back to the United States, and apparently, the government got involved and flew him to Miami where he was externally fixated. Wikipedia. Org wiki externalfixation Ilizarov apparatus external fixator. JPG. And transfused several times. I guess he had some internal trauma as well. About a week later, he was shipped up to the Midwest to my hospital. Literally blew my mind the shit this poor guy went through, just because he wanted to enjoy a vacation. Sadly, I think that he ended up losing one of his legs anyways, because his wounds wouldn't heal, and he ended up with osteomyelitis, bone infection. Obligatory not mine, but dad was a nerdoc, and one he told a lot when I was present for were. A guy with a blood alcohol level of 85 was basically dead on a gurney not breathing. Suddenly, this ducker sits up and punches my dad right in the face, says turn those damn lights off, and then lays back down and passes out. Apparently, he was a massive alcoholic and no one knew how he was still alive, and he had some kind of crazy tolerance built up. Car accident ahead of us on the freeway one day. Dad goes running up, so I see none of the gore, but driver is suspended in his seat in a flipped over car. The car and the guy were both ripped in half at about midsection. Dad goes to work on this guy who is fully conscious and rather concerned he's missing everything below his hips. Being upside down kept enough blood in the guy's brain that he was awake for a while, long enough they landed a hello on the highway and tried to fly him to the hospital. He didn't make it, and I have never seen so much blood in my life. Dad left his clothes on the side of the road after giving the highway patrol a statement, dropped me at school in his underwear. None of this struck him as strange at all. A few years back my wife was doing clinicals at the local hospital while still in school and a guy came in with a blood sugar of 9. And he was totally conscious lucid. As a type 1 diabetic myself I almost fell off my chair when I heard that. Damn. That's the lowest I've ever heard. I once had a blood sugar of 21 that I was completely conscious and aware when I was having it. All I felt was a little low, like the way you'd expect to feel at 70. I just treated it and went back to my business. It's really amazing how diabetics can get such low blood sugars. It's probably partially because of hypoglycemic unawareness. I think that's how I had a conscious 21. At that time in my life I was having lows a lot, but it's still baffling. 15 years ago my mum dated a guy who had both a brain tumor and leukemia. To treat the leukemia they had to stop treating the brain tumor and vice versa. He was given 2 years to live. He told my mum that he needed to focus on getting his affairs in order and spend time with his kids. They'd only been dating a few months. Very casually. Saw the dude a few weeks ago. Still kicking. Still has the tumor. They successfully treated the leukemia, but now he has osteoporosis and a sort of not epilepsy. They found out he had brittle bone when he had a seizure and broke a lot of bones falling down. But he's just getting on with it. Couldn't kill the guy with an axe. I'm still fairly new in my training, but one of the first crazy recoveries I've seen. College kid was out drinking with his buddies and had a bit too much to drink. He presumably aspirates some of his vomit and it causes this massive inflammatory reaction in his lungs called ARDS. He goes from perfectly healthy to being on death's door within an hour. He gets transferred to our ICU in the middle of the night, completely unstable, on a ventilator, maximumed out on 5 presses, life support meds to keep your blood pressure up, and is being considered for RCMO. Edit. Basically like a temporary machine bypass of your heart and lungs, used as a last-ditch effort to save someone. His parents are on a last-minute flight from out of state with no bags packed to get to their son. Our team is concerned that he won't make it through the night and braces friends for the worst. The treatment for ARDS is actually something called pronouncing, which is when you literally just flip the patient onto their stomach, and miraculously, 2 hours later he is off all presses, maintaining his own blood pressure, and while very sedated from all the meds he's able to respond to voice and shake and nod his head to questions. He makes a full recovery 4 days later, and vowing to stay away from alcohol for a while. Edit. To translate the medicalese a bit. ARDS equals acute respiratory distress syndrome, ECMO equals extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, ICU equals intensive care unit. Working in an Aboriginal community, a woman walked in complaining of a head itch behind her eye. She was told to take a seat, and as she turned around she had a butter knife sticking out the back of her skull. Apparently a drunk relative came home and stabbed her while she slept. Edit. Yes, she survived. Was flown back to Townsville for imaging, then on to Brisbane for surgery. A nurse here. The one that immediately stands out in my mind was a diabetic who was, of course, non-compliant with her regimen and came in feeling like crap because her blood sugar was high. How high? Try just below 1300. For reference, diabetics are supposed to manage their blood levels and keep them no higher than 180, and even that's kind of pushing at the limit. By all accounts, this girl should have been in a diabetic coma, at best. Yet somehow she was conscious, walking, talking, and arguing with us every step of the way. Despite the fact that her pee was almost pure sugar and resembled crystallized honey, it was a 20-minute argument to get her to stop drinking her Diet Mountain Dew. She firmly believed that the fact that it was diet meant it was fine. Her blood was syrup. How we got enough to run blood tests was a minor miracle in itself. She kept complaining and asking for snacks and junk and she was not a pleasant person at all. Obviously, she gets to go up to the ICU. 20 minutes after we get her up and transferred, she walks out of the hospital. Why? She was mad that they only would give her water to drink. Priorities, I guess. Haven't seen her since, but I still wonder about her from time to time.